My name is Eric Lopez. I'm the Director of Corporate Accountability here at HACER. I hope you've been enjoying the sessions today, and I know the remainder of the day will not disappoint. I'd like to welcome you to our next session, Chief Diversity Officer's Perspectives, Redefining Inclusion Narrative. We're expecting a great conversation on very relevant and timely topics, so let's get right to it. Today's conversation is being facilitated by Pamala Fuller, who serves as the Inclusion and Bias Thought Leader for FranklinCovey. Welcome, Pamala.
Thank you so much, Eric. I am thrilled to be here. Buenas tardes. Welcome. Bienvenidos. As Eric mentioned, my name is Pamala Fuller, and I'm Chief Thought Leader around inclusion and bias for FranklinCovey, a company focused on performance and performance improvement. And I spend a lot of my time talking with executives and chief diversity officers about how to progress diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in their organization. So I'm so thrilled to moderate this panel and want to begin by welcoming our panelists. So I'm going to ask that each of our panelists spend 1 or 2 minutes introducing themselves and sharing, particularly in our current landscape, right, our current climate, what their diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities are. So if each of you had to pick 1 or 2 things that are a critical priority for you right now in your role, I think it would behoove all of our attendees to hear that priority. It's hard to know sort of where to focus in the current moment. So let's begin with Celeste Warren. Celeste is Vice President for Global Diversity and Inclusion Center of Excellence at Merck. Welcome, Celeste.
Thank you, Pamela, and thank you, HACER, for this opportunity. As Pamela said, I have the distinct honor of being the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Merck, and we have had a very busy year, as I'm sure everyone is in the D&I space, but I think our priorities center around 4 areas, but I'll just talk about a couple. One is, I think this year, a lot of focus on inclusion. So going and making sure, of course, that we have a diverse workforce, which is our first priority, but making sure that that diverse workforce, that we're surrounding them around an environment of inclusion so they can feel enabled, empowered, and energized to be able to fulfill our mission of saving and improving lives. And this year has become so challenging in being able to do that because of the fact of just the external environment, the civil unrest, the COVID-19 pandemic. So really working on that this year and creating that culture of inclusion is important.
Yeah, thank you so much. And now we'll hear from Melonie Parker, who's the Chief Diversity Officer at Google. Welcome, Melanie.
Hi, thank you. I'm so glad to be here with you today. And very similarly, at Google, we've been very focused on belonging. That's really how we started the year, and really looking at in-groups and out-groups. So, what does it mean to be othered when you're in the out-group, and how do we look at bridging across differences? And so we've been very focused on ensuring that across Google, everyone feels like they belong, and beyond that, welcome, because we know like being invited to the table is different than being welcomed. And so that's how we started the year. Then we found ourselves in a syndemic with COVID, with racial reckoning that we have in the world. And so we're also very focused on equity, particularly racial equity. And so we're centering our Black plus Googlers, as well as other underrepresented minority, and looking deeper at systems and structures that may need to be dismantled to ensure that we have equitable outcomes across all of our Google population.
Thanks so much, Melanie. And last but not least, we have Ed Martinez, who is UPS's Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer and also the president of the UPS Foundation. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you, Pamela. And again, thanks to my fellow panelists and to HACER and Sid Wilson for this opportunity for all of us to have this conversation, this very important conversation. And I really want to thank everyone that's participating, that's online right now and listening to us, because I think that if we're focused on anything this year, you see UPS drivers, they're out there every day since this whole unfortunate pandemic started is our people. And listening to our people, having great conversations with them like this, where we're having town halls, which is amazing that we're attracting 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 UPSers at any one time, because I think our people want that space to talk. They're hurt by the things that they're seeing happening around the country and in fact around the world. Carrying a heavy load at work, as well as carrying a very heavy heart. I think, if there's a second priority to that, it'd be our stakeholders. And I know we'll talk more about that, but we understand that what happens outside our walls also comes inside our walls, and really focusing on our key stakeholders. And I know we'll talk more about that later, but just very happy to be here and really share this conversation with everyone today.
Thank you so much, all of you. I think I'm hope and assume that it is insightful for our participants to hear sort of what you're each focused on. And I'm really taken by the similarities, right? Like, I think the workplace has progressed over the last decade to really prioritize whole person. And then when we hit the pandemic, our personal and professional lives crashed together, right, for so many of us. And then the racial reckoning is deeply personal for so many people. So what I hear consistently is this focus on people and really ensuring that they are drawn in to the organization, right? That the organization, they don't have to fit in, get in where they fit in, the organization can flex around them. I think that consistency is really insightful. So I do want to share with our participants, I have some questions I'm going to ask our panelists, some things I'm curious about, but this session is really for you. So please do ask questions in the chat and I'll monitor those and we'll sprinkle them into our discussion and dialogue over the next 50 minutes or so. We want this to feel really useful for each of you. Why don't we get started with you, Melanie? I'd love to hear what brought you to diversity and inclusion as a track in corporate America.
No, thanks for the question. So I have a long career in HR, and what I recognized in my roles across human resources and before that, communications, is the opportunity and ability to amplify the voice for the underrepresented and looking for equity in those systems. And so it was just a very natural career move for me to take the experiences that I've had and channel them towards like a more diverse and inclusive environment. I used to work in recruiting. And I probably held every single job in recruiting, but very important when you're recruiting is not just looking at the diverse pool and where you're pulling talent from, but making sure that where you're pulling our candidates into, that we're representative in an organization that is inclusive, that is welcoming, and that places a high priority on people. And so that really was what drew me into the diversity work. And it really is an opportunity to impact systems that are designed to address people practices and people processes. And so being inside to have that systems view and bringing that body of knowledge with me, I think has been really key to making the progress that we continue to need to make.
Yeah, thank you for that. I worked with a recruiter recently who said, I tell my hiring managers, it's my job to get them into the organization. It's your job to keep them, right? And so to be able to tackle the whole talent life cycle in your current role, particularly when you were in that one component of the talent life cycle, I'm sure is really, really fulfilling.
Well, and I subscribe to, we have to re-recruit our employees every day. So I think when we're doing it right, we have to come to work saying what makes it this, where's the secret sauce? And it's what we're doing in the environment we're providing so that people can bring all of who they are. They don't have to code switch or check a part of their identity at the door. So I think that really is the charge, is not recruit them to keep them, but re-recruit them every day.
You have to sort of earn the right. I love that. Celeste, I'd love to hear from you. What are the most pressing hurdles America's corporations must still overcome regarding diversity and inclusion?
It's a great question. I think this day and age, especially this year, we've seen corporations take an amplified role and look at diversity and inclusion, and it's manifested itself in a lot of different ways. But for me, one of the biggest hurdles that I've seen is having to have to break individuals' paradigms that managers and leaders have when it comes to their values and their belief systems around diversity and inclusion. I think in past years, they were able to mask it. Those that really didn't embrace diversity and inclusion, able to mask it in other things, other priorities, et cetera. But I think now we've come to a place, a precipice in this time in history where your paradigms, what you believe when you leave work, it really does integrate into how you perform as a leader and as a manager within the corporation. So that, I think, is a really, really pressing hurdle, being able to overcome that and really approaching managers and leaders and really talking to them about the importance of D&I, helping them to understand it and embrace it, because it permeates everything that we do, from a representation standpoint, ensuring we have a diverse workforce, from an inclusion standpoint, making sure that employees feel included and belonged, and all of the other aspects of integrating it into our business practices and all of that. So I think that really at the center and the core of our being able to move forward and get over these hurdles is really talking through the individual paradigms that some of the managers and leaders have. And when I think about that aspect of it, it carries through from a representation standpoint, because how many times have you heard managers and leaders say, well, I just want to hire the best candidate, period. And whenever I hear a leader say that, my antenna goes up, and I just say, okay, well, close your eyes. And I want you now to picture the best candidate. And when I close my eyes and I picture the best candidate, that best candidate is a Black female, or it's a Latina female, or it's an Asian female. What do you picture? And when you get them to really think about it, and you can have that in-depth conversation, I think that really goes a long way. And part of having an inclusive environment means you have to have these uncomfortable conversations. Yes, they're uncomfortable, but you'll never get to inclusion unless you have them. And having those conversations is about really talking to leaders around the paradigms that they have around diversity and inclusion, because it permeates everything that we do after that.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting that leaders often sort of relegate the role of diversity, equity, and inclusion, just like HR or finance, right, or other sort of business support or back office kinds of things, to this team, right? It's this team's responsibility. And the reality is that if leaders are not thinking proactively, to your point, Celeste, about paradigms around how they are being inclusive, then their leadership can't be any good, right? Because they're sort of unintentionally even leaving people out of it. So I think that lens is so critical.
Absolutely. It's interesting when I think about leadership, what we found is that a lot of times our leaders aren't talking to their first and second line managers. So they're sort of in this executive echo chamber. And when it comes to really driving D&I through the organization, they have a problem really talking about it passionately and driving outcomes through their management team. So that's another aspect of what we see as a hurdle.
Yeah, there's this great saying that comes from the quality movement, sort of processes that the person who knows the most about a thing is the one 10 feet from it. And the higher up we get in leadership, the more we feel removed from that 10-foot view, right? And so there's something about proactively seeking that out that is so critical. Our chat is blowing up. We've got lots of requests. So Ed, I'd love to turn to you. There's a question around specific commitments or initiatives you've established in your organization to move DEI forward. Is there any specific initiative or program that you'd like to share that you think really highlights the progress that can be made in this space?
Sure. Great question. But I'll tell you that I really love, the points that Celeste made on the fact that you're going to have managers, you're going to have people that are really giving this just lip service, and you really have to just double your efforts to kind of, for lack of a better term, to weed that out, because I do believe that racism is an insidious disease, right? It's a disease that you have to stay on top of it. Unfortunately, we've seen that it persists in all parts of our society. Our priorities are very much like many of these great companies that are represented today. I think that when we talk about advancing DEI today, you have table stakes, right? The table stakes are, you have to have leadership involved. You have to have the CEO engaged. You have to have goals. You have to have measurement. You have to keep tabs on your workforce. You have to have business resource groups. I think that we've advanced to the point now where things like that are table stakes. We are focused on a number of different initiatives. We certainly have a new CEO, Carol Tomei, just became CEO of UPS June the 1st. And one of her first acts as CEO was to declare the fact that if no one is safe, we're not safe. She formed a task force. The task force is a cross-functional group of UPSers from all facets of the company that are advancing a number of internal and external initiatives. And I just want to draw an interesting highlight in these activities, in that I think that the private sector, I think we need to get more engaged externally, okay, with our institutions, with civil society, with government, really take a more active role in, I'll give you one example, in looking at the laws, anti-hate crime laws, anti-lynching laws. I think that we can certainly do a lot by drawing attention to these laws and do more canvassing around the entire country, and in fact, around the world, to make sure that we weed out and introduce laws that are going to bring about more equality in our communities. And so that is an area that to me really stands out, that we are doing now more than ever in that area.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think to that effect, and I'd actually love to hear all of your thoughts on this question. There's been a question around, everyone is working hard towards moving diversity, equity, and inclusion forward, but we are seeing only incremental progress. And I think all of your comments have sort of lent themselves to what some of those struggles are. So I'd actually love to hear from everyone on this. What do you think really specifically is stopping that momentum, that forward movement?
Well, let's see. I think that there is a fear for a loss of power in the power structure, and those that are leading and in that power structure. And I think that when they think about diversity and inclusion, they think about it from the standpoint of a pie, and there are only so many slices of that pie. And if I have to give up a slice, I'm giving it up to someone who is diverse, then I'm losing. And fundamentally, I think over the decades, that fear has been in either the forefront or the backfront of how those that are in the positions of power, how they think. And some of us think, well, they have if there's 10 slices of that pie, well, they already have 9 of the 10. They can't just give up one. But I think we have to think past and blow away the paradigm of the pie and think of it more of there's an infinite sea of resources that everybody can partake of. And when you use those infinite resources, you're going to create a much better company, a much better organization. You're going to have more engaged people, and you're going to perform well. And so that's the paradigm shift. I think that I keep talking about paradigms, but I just think that we're really getting deep now in 2020 around diversity and inclusion, and people are scared. They're scared.
I'd like to follow up on that. When I was thinking, Celeste was talking about fear. And when we think about belonging, I mean, the heart of that is this primal fear that we all have that we're not going to be included. So we think about belonging. What are we doing? We're thinking about who is of least risk, like who's minimally risky. That and minimal risk equates to people who are most like us, and everybody else becomes the others. And so even unknowingly, based on our own fears, we're othering. And this is where, I believe data powers progress, and continuing to really be informed by data and calling ourselves as companies to account about being transparent. I like to say at Google that we're leaders and learners. Like, we've been very transparent over the last 6 years through our diversity annual report. We published the largest publicly available DEI data set, but we would be counted among the number that with moderate progress. I mean, we do work up against the law of large numbers, keeping that North Star, but that's what continues to power that. And so we think about representation. And so how do we increase representation? Because more than hiring, representation is how we hire and how we retain our talent. And we know that what happens between the time we hire and the time our talent walks out of the door is critically important, so that we're growing our own talent, providing people with those robust careers that Celeste talked about, but keeping the eye on what's keeping our employees motivated, what's keeping them at our company, and how do we, look at those leverage points. And one of the things I don't think we talk enough about is within those, within that data, how are we looking at equity? So beyond equality, which would say we would have an equal approach and we would treat everybody the same. Well, actually, that doesn't work for brown and Black communities, because not everybody starts at a level playing field. So we know we have to figure out, using data, what's happening so we can customize or make bespoke talent solutions to bring people not just to the average, but bring people to that level of fairness across. And so that's what I believe we have to continue to do more of, and have more of those conversations about what level of customization is required. Like, what do we need to do to continue to lift as we climb?
It's interesting how you hear us all talk about different things and activities that we're doing, and it's obvious that there's no silver bullet. You have to be doing a lot of things right and all at the same time. I can add to this by saying accountability and working collectively. I go back to the issue of holding institutions accountable, whether you're a company, whether you're a local government, whether you're a local public official, whether you are civil society. We have to hold each other accountable, and at the same time, we have to work collectively.
Yeah, I think all of that is so profound, and the chat agrees. our attendees agree, right? This idea of scarcity versus abundance that Celeste talked about. Melanie, the reality that each of us sort of falls into that primitive amygdala part of our brain and doesn't want to change, right? Change feels dangerous, it feels nefarious. And add this accountability piece that we can all sort of talk a good game, but are people actually behaving differently in the day-to-day? I think that is so critical. Ed, I'd love to stick with you for a moment. We've had a question about access to diversity, equity, and inclusion conversations and initiatives, that it feels like at a corporate level, people are engaged, more engaged than they've ever been. But there are these other populations in the organization that are potentially being left behind of traditional learning or work in an hourly or shift component, and it makes it difficult for them to participate in employee resource groups or mentoring or things like that. And so I'd love to hear from you any thoughts you have on how you engage, you know, housekeeping, facilities, drivers in your case, hourly and unionized labor versus the corporate experience.
It's a huge challenge. And I will tell you, as a company with over 500,000 employees around the world, those are the kind of things that keep us up at night. Okay. We have a lot of people that work very, very hard every day and barely have an opportunity for themselves, and making sure that they feel like they belong, that they get all of the exposure to all the things that we've talked about, the training, the talent development. Those are the things that really are the challenge. And I will tell you that one of the ways that we are working hard to make sure that everyone understands our values is by technology. Leveraging technology more than ever now, particularly working in this virtual environment, is one of the ways that we feel that we have to make sure that we have the best human resource technologies. Because just think, I have leaders in this organizations that have 50,000, 60,000 employees in their business unit. How does that business leader understand the talent that she has in her portfolio? And so we are, leveraging technology so that she has that visibility, because sometimes it's not really an intentional act. It's the limitation of your spheres of influence, of your own capacity not to fully understand. As just one simple example, who works for you? Who works for you in another state? And of course, this is exasperated by the situation that we're in with COVID. So I think leaning on technology is just one way that we have to make sure that UPS driver, that she knows that this company cares about her and cares about her family and cares about her career.
I think one of the unintended positive consequences of COVID is that there used to feel like quite the significant divide between people who were based in a headquarters or in a facility working every day in a traditional office versus people in the field. And now that we're all remote, I think it's pushed organizations to actually, instead of deploying a live solution and then retrofitting it to people who are unavailable live, we have to deploy a virtual solution. And so then that inherently becomes more inclusive, right? It's hard to think of the positives in our current circumstance, right. But that is one. Melanie, I'd love your thoughts on this question that's just come in. And it's really about sort of leadership courage, right? Some leaders are afraid to say the wrong thing. Like they feel like they were a champion of this, and then the protests kicked off and all of the events around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. And now they feel they've actually retreated because they feel like they can't say the right thing. So what advice do you have for those leaders?
My advice is to lean in and to really lean into the comfort and to lead with sincerity and genuine interest. And I would say, even before we came to the racial reckoning that we're in the United States and across the world, look what COVID brought. Like with COVID, we saw xenophobia. We saw a lot of, racist acts against, our Asian friends in the Asian community. And managers needed to lean in and speak up and speak out against that. And I think that extended what we've seen through the racial justice movement. And in this movement, we're seeing our employees are standing in pain current pain and past pain, but we're seeing allies really leaning in and saying, like, what can I do? How can I do it? And so what we're seeing are these, emergence of new phrases that I personally love, which is like active. Like, you got to be an active ally. You got to be an anti-racist, but it denotes action. And that's the call to the leader, is that you have to take an action. There is no space for neutral. And so you got to lean across that discomfort with sincerity, with genuine interest, and connect from the heart to say, what can I do? What do you need? How can I best support you? Because those questions don't require anything but heart and genuine interest and a willingness to support. And so I think that's really the best way for leaders to show up in this moment. It's not connecting across intellect or connecting across like the news line. It's that heart connection with sincere interest and intentionally connecting across differences.
And I think when that intent is clear, it also gives leaders a little bit of space to make mistakes, right? So it's sort of like learning a language. Like, the only way you actually learn another language is if you practice the language. So in Spanish, like everyone here knows, in Spanish, to say you're pregnant, you say you're embarazada, right? And so in order to get better at this and have these difficult conversations, you have to try to be saying that you're embarrassed and say that you're pregnant instead, right? Like, you have to fumble.
I agree.
It's honorable. We can do that.
And I also liken it to, look what happens for those of us who have a driver's license. Like, when we're learning to drive, we move from conscious competence to unconscious competence. Because when we learn how to drive, we're checking the mirrors, like, we're very intentional about switching lanes, and we're consciously competent of everything we're doing. And then at some point you get to, like, where am I even going? I mean, you're driving with no even real thought about, what did I do to make all of this happen? And you're down the highway saying, where am I even going right now? But that's going from like that intentional conscious competence to the unconscious competence. But it requires the training ground and that muscle.
Yeah, that muscle memory. Thank you so much for that. Celeste, I'd love to go over to you. We have a question that's sort of a compound question. There's lots of components. So are you a one-person team, or what, if you're part of a team, what does that team look like? And as you think specifically about Black and Brown talent or BIPOC talent and their support of the work that you do, how can they best help you? And how can they ensure they're not disadvantaged by all the sort of emotional labor and extra effort that goes into trying to move these things forward?
Okay, so I'm assuming the first part of the question was, I have a team of 8 individuals within our Center of Excellence, and I work with 5 what we call diversity ambassador teams that are not hardwired into my organization, but they are 5 different teams. One HR, one are employee business resource group leaders. The third is a disability inclusion strategy council. The fourth is, what is the fourth? Oh, the business consortium. And then the fifth is a line advisory council. So that infrastructure is there to help us, the team, the Center of Excellence, to drive the D&I agenda across the enterprise over 150 or so different countries. The second question, remind me again.
So how can minority talent, right, BIPOC talent, best support you? Because you have this team, but it probably could be bigger. I bet every day you wish it were bigger.
Yes.
So how can BIPOC talent support you? And then how do they avoid that creating sort of a detriment to them professionally?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the teams that I will say I absolutely lean on a lot is our League of Employees of African Descent and our Merck Hispanic organization. So those 2 of 10 employee business resource groups that we have. And I always tell everyone that especially this year, because everyone's been asking, how can I help and what can I do? And what I tell people is, I need you to not get another boat and cloud the river and clog it up. I need you to get on the boat that I'm already on, grab an oar and row with me so we can continue to make success. And so that is what I've asked everyone to do, especially for our employees of color, our BIPOC employees, really leveraging them to be a pulse and listening. What is happening? How are our employees feeling? Are they feeling engaged? Are they feeling overwhelmed? What is happening in the community? And leveraging that group for their voices and helping them. And it has to be a mutually beneficial relationship. So it's not just, oh, I need to get all this information, but it's tell me how you're feeling and also speak for the voice of your community. And so sharing that feedback and then saying, okay, what are interventions that we need to apply so we can make work life a little bit better for you, and engaging them, making them feel valued, because that's why we're all here, because we want to feel valued. We're passionate about what we do, but we want to feel valued, that it's adding to at least to the business objectives or to the people objectives or whatever. But I really leverage our groups and I need their voice. And I have a very strong relationship with especially our two leaders, our global leaders of those two employee business resource groups. And I'm always telling the leader of our Merck Hispanos organization, I need to hear your voice more. I need to hear it more. I need to hear it louder. And so I have, she's done just a fabulous job, but I think that's what it is. But I also am very, very cognizant of the fact that I don't want them to get fatigued. Because everyone is going to them. How are you feeling? How are you this? How are you that? And I have to create an environment where they can just let loose and vent and create psychological safety around them so they can have the dialogue, not feel like it's going to be detrimental to them, but they're elevating their voice in a safe environment where we're going to take what they're saying and we're going to do something about it, and not just listen with empathy, but really just drive action. And that's what they want to see. They don't want to just be talking for the sake of talking, but they want to hear and they want to see you're taking what they're saying and you're creating interventions that are going to drive solutions in the workforce, their environment that they have to come in and work through every single day. So that's one area that I think that we have to be very, very careful of, because a lot of people are tapping them on the shoulder. They're asking, hey, can I get your opinion about this? Or can you read this? And I'm getting ready to send this email. And is it sound too harsh? Or am I doing the right thing? And it's all well-meaning, but it is exhausting. It just is exhausting if you don't take the inventory and say, you know what, let's stop talking about me for a second and let's just ask you how you're doing. And so I think if we're both genuine around that, it has to be a mutually beneficial relationship. Otherwise, otherwise they're going to leave, first of all, and there you have that retention issue that Melanie talked about. But they're not going to feel valued, and we need them to feel valued and contributors.
Yeah, so if I could paraphrase some of that, it's really that they need to lend their voices to the strategic initiatives that are happening to help inform that, make sure you're moving in the right direction as sort of the captain of that ship. But also set appropriate boundaries for themselves in terms of the fatigue and the self-care component of this, right? It is the Audre Lorde, self-care is an act of self-preservation, which is an act of political warfare, right? That it's self-care is not mani-pedis. It's also setting boundaries around really difficult things.
Yep. Absolutely, Pam.
And I wanted to pick up on that, the fatigue factor, particularly with respect to the leadership. I think we have to get to the point, and God willing, we will, to show results, right? To show the leadership the positive byproducts of everything that we're all trying to do, within the four walls of the company and outside the four walls. And that's very important to show that, all of these efforts are in fact paying off with our employees, with our customers, with our suppliers, with our communities. So we're going to get to a point where we have to show that positive reinforcement so that we can keep going. Because as we all know, and as we said earlier, this is a journey without a finish line, unfortunately. And we need the leadership, we need our people to be there all the way through it. So you have to be able to extract the value that we're creating, across all of our stakeholders, to really reinforce that what we're doing, in fact, is going to lead to a better company, to a better community.
You talk about, Pamela, there's one thing too that I'd be curious to hear from everyone. The leaders, the diverse leaders in the organization, and you talk about fatigue, especially when there's so few of us, right? And how we're being tapped on to lead different things and do different things, and feeling that, is this going to be a CLM, a career limiting move, if I speak on behalf of my race, if I speak on behalf of my gender? And I tell you, you've probably seen all of the articles around executives of color that are struggling with this, and have for many years had to assimilate, right, to corporate America in order to succeed. But in recent years, I'm not going to assimilate. I'm going to be me. I'm going to be my authentic self, because I think, at least in my space in healthcare, coming and having your functional discipline, whether that be a scientist or an engineer or a marketer or a salesperson, is important. But in our space, we also want you to come with your cultural experience as well, and bring that authentic self to play, because you can help us by helping us to understand patients of your community and what we're doing to either inhibit or block being able to have those successful outcomes for those patients of color. So, that is something that I think is really something that is really important, that the executives of color and what they're facing because of the lack of representation across corporate America.
Celeste, I think that's really important. And we at Google, we call that culture add. And so culture add is really important. So it's not about how you fit to the culture or asking people to fit to your culture. It's what does your culture need that's additive, and how do you seek out difference and then leverage that difference in a way that's affirming and positive and adds to the company, the culture, the innovation, for us, like building products that are helpful for everyone, all of that. What we do with executives of color, we have leadership councils. So we have 16 employee resource groups, about 35,000 of our Google employees participate. But on top of that, we have leadership councils. So we have a Latin leadership council, we have a Black leadership advisory group, and they really have deep insights wide across the company based on the roles, and then deep within the communities that they sit in. But they serve more as an advisory consultative function as to what do we need on behalf of the company, so that the work that subject matter owners need to do doesn't fall on this group of executives, but that the advice and the counsel and the guidance is there, so that we're taking those insights in. And so I think we just have to better leverage our executives of color and find the ways that they consult, but that they add to, because too many folks lower level, leading to that level, feel like they have to check a part of who they are at the door, and then they pick it back up on their way out, or now before they log on, they're trying to think about what do I need to do, and what parts of myself do I need to shave off, and that's no longer true. Particularly as you look generationally, that's not even nobody's going to do that. That's not acceptable, and we have to be flexible and make a space for how we add to the culture.
Do you have additional thoughts on that, Ed?
I mean, I think on the issue of our executives, our minority executives, they're under tremendous stress. But I also think that it's a bit liberating for them as well, because as Melanie pointed out, traditionally we've all had to check part of ourselves at the door. So I see that we're all feeling a little bit liberated. But by the same token, we've got to be sensitive to the fatigue factor, because unfortunately there are fewer of us than there should be.
There is that interesting data point that when a person of color or a woman advocates for diversity, equity, and inclusion, over time that does harm to their career. Whereas when a white man advocates for diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is helpful to their career, right? Because they're seen as benevolent versus a person of color or woman who, it seems as if I'm here saying, I think you need to have more Black women on the executive team, Afro-Latina specifically. And it just feels like I'm saying you need to hire me, right, to the executive team.
Right. Yeah.
So I'd love to hear any insights. Let's maybe start with you, Ed, around that allyship piece. We've touched on it, but as we look at, this audience of Latino and Hispanic leaders, right, how do we build allyship across our white colleagues and counterparts to do some of this lift and advocacy?
Yeah. And, that is, in terms of when we look at the challenges, that is a challenge that existed even before the national reckoning on race that we're having today, is making sure that, the white male, it doesn't feel under siege. I was about to say that my heart has been warmed by how all of our BRG groups we have 8 different types of communities represented by BRGs, and they have all coalesced around this issue. And so I think that we think very long and hard by making sure that we engage everyone and make sure that everyone feels that they understand how to engage. Because, getting back to a subject that we spoke about in a couple different ways is, sometimes people just don't know how to engage in the conversation. They feel inhibited. And, Melanie raised this issue about it's a muscle that you have to practice. And you raised the issue of understanding how to talk about it, understand, what the verbiage is to talk about racism and to talk about Black communities and talk about Hispanic communities and the Asian communities. So I do think that it remains, a challenge for all of us as we focus on, at this point, we're very focused on the Black community, to make sure that we, bring along our people to understand how to be an ally. I think for many of them, as I said earlier, it's been natural. But for others, you have the same traditional challenge to make space for them to create really a pathway for them that they can walk into the conversation. And that is both art and science, because many people are in different places. And what we try to do is to meet people, where they are. I mean, you're always going to have people that are just locked in and they're not going to want to be engaged. But many people are in that broader spectrum, and you have to meet them where they are and create a pathway for them to be engaged.
Melanie, we had a question on data. So I think you had originally brought up data, and someone asked if we can say a little bit more, expand on the data issue. In some corporate cultures, it's difficult to acquire data due to what's perceived as putting a light on the failures of the status quo, which then leads to spinning and hiding and sort of positioning the data. And we have the data, we don't want to tell the people about the data and all of this. So if we need data to inform decisions to move forward and make progress, how do we convince companies to share their data, to even have their data? I mean, I talk to lots of leaders who don't even have their data.
Well, I think it's hard to understand if you're making progress without data. So my recommendation for people who work in companies and they don't have data is to ask, what's informing our diversity strategy? Like what indicators are you using? Because there's some level of data, even if it's employee sentiment in an employee survey, to do that. I mean, and typically what we want to know when we're looking at the basic level is, how are we hiring underrepresented groups relative to majority groups. So what's that positioning look like? Intersectionally, like how are we breaking that down as we're looking at like Latina versus Latino as an example? And so we want to get finite. Then we want to look at retention. When we're looking at how we retain employees, what we really want to see as signs of a healthy org is parity. So there should be like a cluster, like a fist around how employees are leaving across different groups. If it's spread out and there's a lot of separation, there's something happening across those groups that we probably need a little bit more data to drill down on, to take a look at, to see, hey, why is one group leaving at a faster rate than the other rate? And then we want to look at how are we promoting people. So those are like basic levels of data. Higher levels of data, if you have past that benchmark, would really be, how do people feel about the company? Do they feel they can succeed at the company? So questions that you would find in your employee survey. And if you don't have one, asking questions and using questions is really a great way to get to like deeper levels of understanding. But how are we measuring employee sentiment? And what does that look like at the aggregate level? And then what does it look like across differences? And so just at the basic level, that's what I would do. And I would use questions. That's my advice for how you really get your companies to take a look at what's important and what's informing the strategy that they have.
I feel like questions are such a powerful tool in any kind of difficult
I
conversation.
agree.
Right?
I brainstorm questions. Yeah. So when I brainstorm, I'm just blindly, and I'm curious by nature. And so I'm just brainstorming, like, what are all things like I want to know? Satisfy my own curiosity. But through that brainstorming, you can come up with some pretty powerful questions.
Yeah. Well, one final question. I have 2 minutes left to get one final question. And Ed, you sit in a unique seat because you are not only responsible for diversity and inclusion, but also the president of UPS's foundation. And so I'd love to close on this note in terms of, you know, this connection between corporate social responsibility and diversity and inclusion work. And I would venture to say that is also expanding. So it's not just that, but it's also corporate sustainability and corporate wellness and social justice. And I'd love for you to share your experience.
I will tell you, you know, when I was given the role as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer, I was already president of the foundation. And it didn't pop out at me naturally, but it has just been a huge value creator for us. The foundation, one of its key pillars is diversity and inclusion. And so we invest in DE&I all over the world with tremendous organizations like HACER, like the National Urban League, the NAACP, Unidos US, and Ascend and LEAP and OCA. And to be able to create that value in our communities, extend the values of UPS to our communities in a more profound way, invite our people to engage with all of these organizations that have major local affiliate networks all over the country, has just enriched our program tremendously. And not only that, but you know, the foundation supports about 4,300 organizations across 174 countries around the world each year. So now when I speak to someone or an organization that could be in Hanoi, could be in Berlin, you know, the conversation around D&I is permeating in all of what we do that's may perhaps not be connected to diversity and inclusion, but it may be a road safety program that we are training young people in Berlin, let's say. And we ask those questions. Well, how are you doing with diverse minorities in Berlin? So it's just been a huge gift to be able to couple the community engagement, the community investments with the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at the company, so that we can have that broader multiplier impact really all over the world.
Yeah, I can totally see the efficiencies in that, and also how that really drives equity, right? I mean, so much of corporate social responsibility is about access. And so as we create access and opportunity, it sort of directly impacts this.
Yeah.
Well, before I hand it back over to Eric, I just want to thank each of you so much for your time and for your answers. I have learned a lot in this session. I wish I had another hour with you because we have that many more questions. And I've really enjoyed this. Thank you so much. I see in the chat someone said, Pamela, great questions, but these are actually the participant questions. So thank you, participants, for contributing to our dialogue.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Pamela, Celeste, Melanie. Thanks, everyone on the line.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our moderator, Pam, and our panelists for that insightful and engaging discussion, and to all of you for participating today. I've seen some great social media posts throughout the day and want to encourage you to keep posting using the hashtag #HaSER Our next session, Empowering Corporate Boards Through Diversity, will bring together the Alliance for Board Diversity for a thought-provoking conversation on importance of diversity in governance, and will begin at 3 p.m. Join us in the auditorium for that discussion. Thank you and see you then.